Have you ever done something you wish you could do a redo of it? Well, I feel like I've cheated you a little bit because I didn't give you a lot of the information that I had on the last video, which was on ozone, because on oxygen, because I didn't include things like ozone or hyperbaric chambers. So I want to take you a little bit deeper, because the goal is to get you breathing so you're exhaling completely and inhaling completely. But there's a lot of things I didn't share with you because I had basically forgotten about them, because it's been so long ago, about 30 years, that I wrote the book Oxygen Deprivation Syndrome. So today I'm going to kind of just go over the basics with you, and hopefully it will take you deeper and it will get you breathing more deeply, and it'll make you understand the value of the change of oxygen and carbon dioxide that you're doing in your lungs and you're breathing. So to start with, it was about 30 years ago, and I didn't talk about ozone because ozone has gotten a really bad rap by the media, because the ozone layer is really important. Now what happens is, if you've seen the sunlight pulling moisture up into the clouds, you can see it climbing, and it goes up into the clouds and it comes back down as rain. Well, what you don't know is that above the clouds there's the ozone layer. And ozone comes down to the earth after dark, and it pushes all the garbage out of the air onto the ground. Now, it doesn't do it in the daylight because the hydrocarbons are being lifted by the sunlight, and it's being pulled up. In the dark, it comes down and it cleans the air. So I want to teach you a little bit about ozone, because I have 2 ozone steam cabinets in the basement of our house, because ozone is O3, not O2. So ozone has an extra oxygen molecule in it. So when it goes into the skin and the peptides of the skin is broken down into oxygen, O1, and it's assimilated by the body. So I just want to give you a little background on that, because if you ozonate water and you drink the water, it puts extra oxygen into your body. And our next video, of course, is going to be on water. So I'll get into that a little bit later. I had a friend a long time ago, retired lieutenant colonel from the Marine Corps, and he was a deep sea diver, and he took crews down to work on oil rigs all over the Gulf of Mexico and the North Sea. Well, the North Sea is warm water. I didn't know that, because the Gulf Stream goes up along the East Coast, goes between England and France, and goes up into the North Sea. Well, he had hyperbaric chambers because they were used for decompression for his deep sea divers if they got the bends, if they came up too fast. Well, I learned an awful lot about hyperbaric chambers from Terry. Well, here's something that I didn't realize until I met Terry, that if a person has a stroke and you can get them into a hyperbaric chamber soon enough, there are no bad effects of the stroke. Why? Because the body is having pressurized oxygen forced into all the tissues and the cells. So if you have an opportunity in your local area to find somebody that has a hyperbaric chamber, and you have any kind of malady that is oxygen deprived, you need to go try it. You need to go get in it, and they put a couple pounds of pressure in the chamber, forcing oxygen into all your tissues. We have a friend who has the C, and she finally got a hyperbaric chamber, and the C is all gone out of her body now. So I want to talk a little bit to you today about oxygen saturation. I have an oximeter that I can put on my finger, and it reads my oxygen content level. Well, oxygen and air changes, the saturation changes with elevation. For example, at 500-foot elevation, air is 20.9% of oxygen. At 2,000 feet, it's only 19.4% oxygen, and at 5,000 feet, it's 17.3% oxygen. So no matter how much air you breathe, there's that much less oxygen in the air. You know, science is observation, and the Chinese observe things for hundreds of years. Now, over here in this country, we're impatient, and we jump to conclusions. We get into stuff, and we don't know what it does, and we don't know what the long-term effects of it are. Altitude exposure is known to cause increase in adrenergic activity and blood pressure and heart rate. Why do you feel better at higher altitudes? Because the initial euphoria is the result of increased dopamine, the neurotransmitter contributing to feelings of pleasure when entering high altitude. It just feels good going up in the mountains. Now, I'm not saying stay in the mountains, but it feels good when you get there. So the effects of altitude have a lot to do with the aging process. People with, in fact, studies have shown that there's a 50% lower risk of dying of Alzheimer's and dementia if you live at high altitudes. Now, I don't know why that is. That's what it is. So if you live at high altitudes, there are certain advantages. There are certain disadvantages. One of the disadvantages is there's less oxygen molecules in the air. You know, I have a little sister that lives in Colorado Springs. She's been there for about 50 years. And I've watched her health over those 50 years. And she has challenges that I don't have closer to sea level. Now, so if you're in a high altitude and you're having a problem breathing, well, why do you think so many people move to Arizona and to Florida? Because it's lower altitude and there's more oxygen in the air. You know, at one point I worked with 8 Olympic runners that ran faster than the 4-minute mile. They were studying at Georgetown University. But in the summertime, they would go to Colorado, they'd go to Boulder, Colorado, and train up in the mountains because it increased the ability of their body to assimilate oxygen. So when they got at the lower elevations, they had more oxygen. They would assimilate more oxygen from the air at lower altitudes. So I'm just going to buzz through. I've got about 14 pages of information, and I'm just going to buzz through it for you. And then I'm going to give you a copy of it if you contact me, because I really want you to be healthy. That is the goal. My whole goal of this whole program is to get you healthy. And if you have any family members that have poor health, I mean, I wish you would, you're welcome to teach anything that I share with you. You can blame it on me, but share everything you can. Let's see. Let me skip down a little bit. You know, we're told now that the oxygen level now is 21% in dry air, but that's really not accurate. When I wrote Oxygen Deprivation Syndrome 30 years ago, I had been working with the University of Miami School of Medicine, and it became obvious to us that in concentrated areas of concrete and brick and pavement and tar, that the oxygen level is only 12%. Well, what happens when you get down to 12%? Well, you go into fear and you go into survival. Why do you think people in the deepest inner cities of America, where there's just no vegetation at all, why do you think they get so angry? Well, they're oxygen deprived. And I really didn't understand this till I was studying. There was a group of scientists that did one of those, built those self-enclosed areas where they could produce their own oxygen, produce their own food, and they can live in that center for a period of time. And these were scientists. These weren't a bunch of dummies. These were people that were well educated. And there was about 5 to 7 of them went into this confined area. I think it's called a biosphere. But within just a few days, they were at each other's throats, and they couldn't figure out why. And they finally they got out of there. They got out of the center. Well, they found out that because it was so much concrete, that the concrete was absorbing the oxygen, and they were oxygen depleted. Well, what happens when you're oxygen depleted? You go into survival. So I'm going to go through a few things. How much oxygen is there at 8,000 feet? Like Aspen, Colorado, Vail, Colorado, Park City, Jackson Hole, Wyoming. there is approximately 29% less effective oxygen in the atmosphere. That's 29% less of what they say is 21%. So if you take 7 from 21, you got 14. Well, that's not a very healthy place. At 6 or 7, you die. At 6 or 7%, you're not here any longer because your body can't function without oxygen. At what level is it hard to breathe? Well, it's really hard to breathe at 8,000 feet or above. And 8,000 feet is pretty high. You take Colorado Springs is 6,000 feet. You go up in the mountains, you can get up to 8,000 feet. The higher you get, the harder it is to breathe. Why? Why is it harder to breathe? Because the oxygen molecule is further apart than it was at lower altitudes. Because at lower altitudes, it draws together. At higher altitudes, it separates. I mean, if you were at 30,000 feet in a plane and you didn't have oxygen in the plane, you wouldn't live. I remember that wasn't too many years ago, there was a gentleman with a Learjet, and he and his wife, he was a golfer in Florida, and he was flying somewhere in his Learjet, and they lost contact with him. Well, the decompression had failed in the plane. It had gotten so cold that it froze them, and they flew. Finally, the Air Force put jets up there, followed the plane, went along with the plane till it finally crashed. Just ran out of fuel and crashed. Well, the higher up you are, the less oxygen there is. And the higher up you are, the colder it is. So why? What does cold have to do with it? Well, the colder you are, think about this. What is ice? What is ice? It's water that's frozen. What happens to the water molecules? What happens to the molecules in the water in the water? They separate. They get further apart. And when they're further apart, they get lighter. And the lighter they are, the more they float, the higher they go. Now think about even it goes further. You take water in the other direction, you take it as hot as you can get it, and you turn it into steam, and what's it do then? It rises. Heat rises, cold drops. Heat rises and cold drops. So let's see. Let's see. I want to talk a little bit about what's the fastest way to adjust in altitude. Number one, drink lots of water. As you gain altitude, your body tends to lose water and salt faster than you're used to it. Reduce your exercise. Don't put out as much energy. Get enough sleep. Limit your alcohol intake, which hopefully you're not doing a lot of that anyway. Increase your potassium levels. Protect yourself from the sun and consume more calories. Well, when you have less oxygen, these are ways that you compensate for that. At what height does oxygen start to thin? At 6,900 square feet above sea level. That's when it starts to get thin. Does your blood thicken at higher altitudes? Absolutely it does. So let's see, I just lost my sheet here, but that's okay. We'll get it started again. Okay. Let's see. Mountain air contains fewer toxins such as fine particles and allergens. Another advantage is that thin air can pass smoothly through narrow inflamed pathways in your lungs. If, however, the lungs are severely damaged and unable to expand, people should stay at lower altitudes. Well, see, there's certain advantages to high altitudes, and there's certain advantages to lower altitudes. So I want to talk a little bit about misinformation, because we get a lot of misinformation. And we turn on the news media, and they tell us what they want us to hear. And I'm not knocking them. I mean, they have a job. And it used to be that there were a lot of different companies that control the news media, and now we're down to like 4 or 6 companies that control all the news. And the biggest misconception is oxygen in air. So let me read this for you. Professor Ian Plimer of Adelaide University and Professor John Harrison of the University of Arizona concur. Like most other scientists, they accept that oxygen levels in the atmosphere in prehistoric times averaged around 30 to 35% compared to only 21% today. And they say 21%, but I know scientifically it's only 19. And that the levels are even less in densely populated, polluted city centers and industrial complexes, probably only 15% or lower. Well, I'm going to give you the figure. It's 12%. So the evidence of prehistoric times, and how do they know this? Well, I'm going to tell you how. They took a crystal that had oxygen pockets in it, and they broke open the crystal and they analyzed the oxygen content in the crystals. So back 6,000 years ago, when people lived to be 900 years old, guess what? They had 35% oxygen in their air, and they were oxygenated. And what happens when you're oxygenated? Well, I told you in the last video that I did some acetylene welding, and when I turned the air up in my torch, it got hotter and hotter and hotter. What does air do? Air is the flame that it's a generator that generates the flame of the power. So the more oxygen we have, guess what? Now we can get too much oxygen and we get lightheaded and we pass out. Now remember the last video we talked about if you do this breathing exercise, you might just get lightheaded. Well, you'll get lightheaded if you're oxygen deprived. Now this is not scaremongering. It's not about doomsday. It's what you need to understand that you have the ability to increase your energy levels and increase your oxygen by what? By exhaling completely and filling your lungs completely. And this is not rocket science. This is just common sense. You can't buy common sense. You have to grow into common sense, I mean, there was a time when we were all agrarians and we all learned on the farm and we observed what the animals and the trees and the plants did, and we got a lot of our foundation right from the earth. Where does all the value come from on the planet? It comes out of the earth. Where does diamonds and rubies and emeralds and gold and silver? They come out of the earth. Where's our food come from? It comes out of the earth. Well, we came out of the earth because we're hydrogen beings. We're hydrogen beings. And what is oxygen? The oxygen molecule is 2 atoms of hydrogen and 1 atom of oxygen. So I'm available to answer any questions that you might have. I'm not involved in anything that I'm going to share with you financially, because if I were, that would be practicing medicine without a license, and I used to be president of a medical corporation. That stuff puts you in jail. And I'm just too old to want to go to the big house. So if there's anything I can do to increase your knowledge base and make you better able to handle your own being, I want to do that. I really do. So this was kind of an addendum to the oxygen video. And this weekend I'm going to do the one starting with hydration or water. So God bless you, and you have a great, great day. Thank you.